Thanks very much for being here. It's great to see so many people here on a chilly Saturday afternoon for a closing event for our two current exhibitions by Amy Sheffer and also by Theo Baranski, which you can see in the gallery on the west side of White Columns. My name is Matthew Higgs. I'm the director of White Columns, and I just really sort of briefly wanted to give a context for this afternoon's event, and also to introduce our guests. We'd like to thank Matt Worth, who's over here, from the record label RVNG Intl and Freedom to Spend. It was Matt who introduced us to Amy's work, and it's part of what's turned out to be sort of a really nice and ongoing organic collaboration between White Columns, Matt Worth, and RVNG Intl over the years. I think it's like the fifth project we've worked on together. The first of which was a collaborative album with Juliana Barwick and Iko Mori, which came out in 2010. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Wow, 15 years ago. And then we made another collaborative record with David Van Tighem and a number of other artists and musicians that came out in, I can't see the date on that one, but let's say 10 years or more ago. And we also worked together on the Norma Tanega exhibition here when RVNG Intl made Norma's work available again. But anyhow, Matt told us about Amy, about her work as both a musician and a visual artist, and encouraged us to visit Amy in Great Neck, her home, where the majority of her work was. And for myself and Aaron Somerville from White Columns, it was just a complete revelation to see 5 decades worth of Amy's visual art, and to be introduced in a deeper way to her musical practice too, and to start to think about the relationships between those two ideas. So we agreed to organize an exhibition at White Columns, which I believe is Amy's really first solo exhibition in New York as such.
In New York City.
Yeah, in New York City, yeah. And it's a survey, a sort of focus survey of Amy's practice going back to the late 1960s, which would be one of these portrait paintings here, and to the present. And it includes documentation of Amy's work as a musician, ephemera relating to her performances, video clips of some earlier performance works, and much more besides. And we were gifted by a performance at the opening, if you happen to be here. To coincide with the exhibition, which is one of the reasons that the timing, RVNG Intl have made this extraordinarily brilliant digital reissue of Amy's music with a download compilation with really amazing visuals, which you can buy from the desk after the performance. And we're also very happy to have, again through RVNG Intl, vintage pressings of one of Amy's key recordings, from 1987? 1987.
Whatever it says.
Sealed vinyl copies, cheaper than discogs. So with no further ado, we're going to introduce the two speakers for tonight. We're very happy to be joined by Audrey Gair, who's an artist. And Audrey works with Kingsley in New York. And we thought it would be interesting for two artists of different generations, both working with and through and thinking about painting and its multiple manifestations and intentions, to have a conversation. I'm really here just to chip in or join in as it makes sense, and we're thrilled obviously to have Amy Sheffer here. And I'm going to hand over the mic to Audrey to begin the conversation, and obviously if you have questions, we're very happy to do a Q&A after. Amy?
Sure.
Yeah.
That would be very nice.
Okay, so if you have
If
any
you
questions.
have any particular painting that you'd like to ask me, about
Oh yeah,
the
Amy's very,
motivation, I'd be happy to tell you.
yeah, I'd like to hear
They
about
have-
all the paintings.
they have different
I don't think we have time for that, but I'm going to hand over to Audrey. But thank you again for coming, and please welcome everybody.
Thank you for having me. So Amy and I were starting to talk about this a little while ago, but I wanted to just get back into talking about sort of how your paintings come from maybe like a more intuitive, visionary space. And we were talking about how you feel like the painting is telling you what to do and you're moving through that. And I think, I mean, I feel like that's more of a rare way of making work today. Or at least I don't have friends personally who identify with making their paintings in that intuitive of a way. So I would love to hear more about how that feels and, I mean, what that sounds like if you're really like talking to them.
Well, my paintings are personal, and they're sort of outgrowths of what's moving through me in my life, and different ones are motivated by different things. But, you know, some people say painting, you know, how lonely it is being a painter. I think it's just the opposite, because once you make a painting, you have a companion, and it talks to you, it wants things from you, it responds to you, you know, it's there. So it really is sort of like the ultimate company, you know, and as you go on, it might be a while before it says something again, and then you do something. So once you begin, you know, it's a two-way street, and, you know, I would say my paintings are personal. Some are, you know, from things happening in my life. Like I see over there, there's a baby, that's my niece, you know, my sister, and I had cats, you know, so the cats appear, and things like that. But some of them are just, I don't know how they happen, you know. And other ones, I would say that the one that's in the office with the eyes,
Yeah, that's hanging back.
that is a much more thought out idea. And that sort of came from the fact that people used to say, well, your paintings are you. And I do believe now my paintings are me. But at the time I said, I'm not making self-portrait after self-portrait, you know what I mean? These things passing through, coming to me, you know. And like, maybe I was like that then, but now today I'm something different, you know. So I don't think it's an endless picture of me. But then I decided to paint with eyes, you know, the letter I. I use that as a shape to build different things in relation to people saying that. And there was a lot of eyes, so then it got the idea of a crowd, which is a bunch of eyes moving along. And that painting happened to have sort of like two sort of figures in it. So it was sort of like a crowd and a person and another person, you know. But different ones, and then collages are a different thing, because a lot of them have collage in them. And then, you know, one part of it came from one impulse, and another part came from another impulse. And then when you start making a collage, it all comes together, and it's a bunch of impulses, and then it's, you know, the whole thing, which is something in itself. And then, you know, a lot of people think it's very important to have titles for their pictures and to make people see what they mean to say. But with me, it's just the opposite. It's like, whatever it is to me, a being came into being. And I feel that it can mean whatever people take as the meaning is just as valid as whatever meaning I gave it, because it exists, you know. And that's how I feel about, you know, the personal, because the personal continues, and it always continues, because a person can't look at a picture without, you know, saying, well, this is this, and the artist will say, no, I was trying to say something else, you know. But with me, whatever they think is okay, you know. If they think it's some kind of negative, demonic thing, it's okay. If they think it's an angelic thing, it's okay, you know. It's generally just, you know, it exists, you know.
Do you ever go into your studio and feel blank, or like have writer's block? Do you force yourself to work anyway, or do you wait until you feel?
Having two art forms really took that problem away. Because when, you know, things weren't happening in one thing, I'd switch to something else. And so I had two art forms, so I really didn't have to deal with that too much. Yeah.
Did people try and always like associate your visual art practice with your performance practice, or did you want them to feel associated, or did you want to keep them like separate and in kind of the way you presented yourself?
Well, I used to put on performances and I'd have art shows, you know, and sometimes I presented performances with other, you know, for instance, the woman Rosie Hertline is a violinist, and she's a composer, and she's a songwriter, and she's a poet, and she's a very good visual artist too. So that is not unusual, actually. You know, and often when I performed with people, they were visual artists too. So we would put up, you know, but a lot of times they weren't. But you know, we put up all our work. You know.
So I'm so curious, as someone who, you know, has only lived in New York a couple of years and, you know, involved in the art scene, what it was like sort of back then. And then I know you left New York, so I want to hear, I guess, what it was like, and then I'll follow up with.
Well, I lived on the Lower East Side for many years. I lived on the Lower East Side for many years, and that was very important to my identity. I mean, when I moved away from there, I was like, you know, who am I going to be without living, you know, below 14th Street? And, when I moved, then I moved up around the cloisters, and I was still saying, but you're still in New York, the Bronx is just over there.
Yeah, yeah.
But, and the idea that I would move back to Great Neck, which I hated, you know, it was incomprehensible to me that that would ever happen. But anyhow, now I live in the house that my parents, you know, brought me up in, and yeah, there's a lot of space, you know, keep my art there and all this. So, but the Lower East Side was, for musicians, was an incredible place. You know, there was just so much happening. I mean, Roz and Steve are here, and they must know what I'm talking about. Yeah, because there was just so much happening as far as avant-garde jazz, you know. And when I first moved down there, I was painting, and, you know, I liked to sing songs like Moon River and Misty and stuff like this. And then I met Marzette Botch, and I was like a young woman then. So if you're a young woman, everybody sort of is more seeking you out than when you're older. So anyhow, he wanted me to be on some record on Savoy and to sing avant-garde music. And I really didn't understand avant-garde music at the time. And, but sort of through him, I got into it, and eventually I became extremely, you know, very involved with avant-garde music, more than I am now. But, you know, I was like, I felt avant-garde music was like a direct expression of emotion. It wasn't like saying, I love you, or, you know, we should be together, or what's the world needs now. It was just, you know, anger, joy, you know, passion, sadness, just direct. So I was very interested in that idea. And then at the time, I couldn't really relate to galleries too much, because I would go to these openings and everybody would be talking about themselves, and I'd say, aren't you looking at the pictures? Oh, we looked at them, you know, now. So this kind of discouraged me, but then when I found music, you know, it was such a together thing that we were relating to each other and getting so much from each other. So that drew me into the music as well.
Yeah, because we were talking about how you have both training in art and music, like you did grow up playing.
I played the violin,
Yeah.
and actually I won a contest where I was supposed to perform, and it meant like practicing 4 or 5 hours a day, and I couldn't do that. So that actually discouraged me, but I would like to be playing the violin more, but now I try for the piano. I got a piano. I was never trained on the piano, but piano's great for composing. And I wanted a piano, and I lived on the top floor, and they brought the piano upstairs. You know, outside the window.
Yeah.
A piano came up 5 flights and in the window, you know, and then I had this piano, and that had a lot to do with the beginning of my performing. And then my record, Where's Your Home, that was an interesting, next door to me lived this guy, Curtis Fields, and he was a very amazing person who had been through all these changes, and he had actually been played with Jane Mansfield, and he played avant-garde music, he played any kind of music, and he was a tremendous, like he regarded his body, he said, as a pharmaceutical wonder, you know. So you can imagine, you know, what he did to it, you know. But anyhow, he was recovering when I met him, but he was a tremendous alcoholic, but he was such a terrific player. And so anyhow, that was my first recording. Through him I met Kenny Gill, and you know, we started. And then the second recording, I had this piano, and there were these David Duras and Butch Johnson were players who, they were homeless, and they were piano players, and like David Duras had played with B.B. King and James Brown, actually, and he had actually put out some kind of record which was, you know, known. But I knew him when he was homeless, and he didn't have a piano, and then Butch Johnson had actually worked at Motown as a writer. But anyhow, they were both homeless and they didn't have pianos, so even though I had a lousy piano, they used to come over a lot to play music with me. So that's how that record.
That's really sweet.
Yeah.
Did you like find it was difficult to tap into the part of you that could sort of let go and be avant-garde, or was it like?
No, by that time I was really into it. You know, I was, you know, I did my thing, and the fact that I didn't know what I was doing, it made it pretty easy to be avant-garde.
That's awesome. So you touched a little bit on leaving New York and like adjusting to living back in your hometown.
Yeah.
What did your studio practice, especially like your music and performance practice, change into once you had such a different setting?
Well, that was quite a while. I think I had stopped. I didn't make any records but I did do some performing. I performed at Tonic, which was a very good jazz club. I don't know if I was living out. No, I think I wasn't living, but I did do some performing after I moved out there. That I played with, you know, I had this group. I played with Anonymous, and then I played with some other people. But what happened was I moved uptown. It was problems with my apartment, and you know, the Lower East Side was so crazy. It was beginning to drive me crazy too. So then I moved up near the Cloisters, and there were musicians up there who were like Marlo Thomas. I don't know if anybody had heard of her, but she had these sessions at her house where she'd have people come over, and she had been a concert. She was ready to be a concert pianist, but she smoked grass, and that's affected her memory, you know, so she had trouble being a concert pianist, because you have to memorize. And then there was another woman, Faye, who was a piano player, who had also, she had been on some kind of tour, and she married Louis Balcom, I think, a famous person. They got divorced. But she had a nervous breakdown instead of the tour, so anyhow. They were performing a lot, but anyhow, she had these and then Marlo had this group, Hot Kitty. Oh, she had this group, Hot Kitty. But anyhow, she used to have performances, so I used to sometimes, I was influenced more by classical music through that. And I would also, sometimes I showed my art there. You know, I would give art talks showing art, or I did some music there. So that was a different musical scene. And then I met Suki Ray, who's a very good flute player, and we did some work together.
Are there like records of any of these times in any of your albums?
No, my albums were they were with Anonymous, and then I did a lot of work with Billy Bang, and I put out a CD recently, which one is one of the best 10 releases, new releases from Cadence magazine, but it was actually recorded in January, early January of 2001. It was before, you know, the World Trade Center and everything. But that came about because Billy Bang, who I used to play with, needed some, he had just come from Germany and he needed money to get his violin out of Hock. So I said, well, why don't we make a record, you know? Why should I give you money?
Yeah.
So anyhow, that came about sort of through that, but it was songs that, you know, I was happy to record. But anyhow, that's, you know, for the recording. But as far as my art, when I moved up to the cloisters, I had a pretty good place for painting, but I used to go out to my parents', and they had made this basement studio for me, which I don't like now, but at the time I had a basement studio, I had an attic studio. Now there's not space in either of them. The attic studio, the higher studio is filled with paintings, the basement is cold, clammy, you know, I can't deal with it.
So where's your current setup right now?
Anyhow, but I used to go out to Great Neck a lot to paint there. And what happened was I said, well, what am I going there, you know, and staying at my parents' house and painting and stuff? I said, if I moved near them, then I could just work there and go home, you know, so I would actually be spending less time there.
When we visited you first in Great Neck, what was previously your parents' home, and thinking about what you said at the beginning of this conversation about when you create a new painting, it's not like a lonely experience that you're bringing something new into being.
Yeah.
One of the things that, you know, we were just like amazed and somewhat overwhelmed by was that there are probably 500 paintings.
Oh, and more prints.
Yeah, in the house, and several thousand drawings.
And prints, yeah.
And I was just wondering for you, on a daily basis, is that like a cacophony? Is that like, how do you negotiate being immersed and surrounded by your own work and the history?
Well, I'm mostly interested in what I'm working on, so I'm basically, you know, I'll have several paintings that, you know, I'm mostly involved with them.
But living amongst the history of your work?
I think I kind of relate to it like any person would to paintings.
They're just paintings that exist in your house now that you happened to have painted?
Well, you know, I think that people who live with paintings, it's part of creating the atmosphere in their home that they want.
So I think one of the interesting things when we organized the exhibition with you is to look to your right. The larger painting here is from 1968 and appears on the cover of one of your albums. And then the painting just above it is much more recent.
Yeah.
And if you look at the checklist for this show, the dates of the work I think are really interesting because they represent the last 50 years. And they're set in kind of a conversation, a temporary conversation here at White Columns. But when you're working on new paintings, how self-consciously are you thinking about previous paintings or other paintings that are in the room with you from a different era?
Well, it's actually something different because it was an attempt to do a portrait of my cousin and her husband. And she just felt it didn't look like her at all, so then I just kind of continued without worrying about it looking at her. But it was actually done as a portrait. And I have done portrait, you know, I'm actually usually very good at getting a likeness in portraiture. Very, very good. That's a different kind of thing, but I like that.
So you touched on the amount of drawings. Is that, because I'm always interested, I love collage, but I don't really do it. I feel like to have a strong collage practice, you have to have just so much material. Are you drawing from old scraps of your own work when you're collaging on your paintings?
Yeah, or just all kinds of things. Yes, you know, even like putting a piece of wood on something or old things, yeah.
Are you ever, because you're surrounded by work from so many different time periods, like how far back will you go and mess with a painting that you finished maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago?
Usually not 10 years ago, but it can happen, yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, very often I go up to the attic where I have a lot of work and I'll see something and I'll say, that shouldn't exist, but there's still something in it that I would like to do more,
Are you ever painting over things like completely, this was a mistake, start over fresh?
I've never completely gotten rid of it. There's always something that, stimulates something new. There's always something that I feel, I value enough to.
Yeah, because the work feels like generative to growth. Like there's layers, there's history in the work. Like some of them even really feel like maybe you can see that there was like a journey more than others. Like that one, is that a collage piece in the center? Yeah.
Yes, that's quite several different, quite a few different thoughts put together.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to see paintings that some of them you can really feel like it was a long period of time.
And this one as well.
Yeah.
And then you see at the bottom there is actually a piece of wood with some paint on it.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, you touched on your other job, you were a substitute teacher, and what your relationship was to like making work, career, maybe the other jobs you had to juggle. Because I think if you are, living off of your work, making an income, whatever, there's this pressure to commercialize or have a certain output, right? So was that like an intentional, like, saving the work from that?
Well, I don't know that people were coming around offering me a lot. I mean, I have sold paintings, but there wasn't like, a great income from that. I needed an income from.
Yeah, but you felt like your own personal obligation to like have a life that wasn't connected to maybe like capitalism or.
Well, it wasn't an obligation. I wanted to get away from. I was very critical of middle-class Jewish society, so I wanted to get away from that. And I was thinking about artists that I looked at and blew my mind. Now there was this artist Suko who had an exhibit on the Lower East Side about South Africa, and I remember, and it was totally different from me, where she was actually totally set on saying things and changing the world. But I remember how mind-blowing that exhibit was for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like we were talking in the back about like art that's seeking to changing the world or just like a personal thing. Do you think you have a perspective on your work now that you've made so much of it and you're older, like about what kind of mark you did make or could have like the effect on a younger artist, like maybe something you're feeling is lacking from the art world or the music world?
What I really know about is my own family. So I would say that my niece, who sang here the last time, and her husband, who actually now is becoming a woman, but they have a child together. And this child, her husband has decorated all my paintings all over, and my paintings mean so much to them, and that really, and it means so much to their son to grow up with paintings and everything. And he is fantastic. He's 7 years old. He did this thing. I think it's a masterpiece. His different drawings and stuff. And he's very stimulated by my work. So I see that as
it's more of like a personal.
Leading to and how meaningful art can be to people. But just in terms of what type of life and mindset they have, in their house. And then the other is my cousin, who's she is like, if only I could be a housekeeper like her. She is like, everything is just perfect, but she has so much stuff, and she can't go any place where they have some sort of artistic porcelain or something without wanting to something. but my paintings are tremendously meaningful to her as far as whatever the meaning, and also the idea of colors and, you know, creating the environment that she could find happiness from this environment that she's created, this sanctuary she's created for herself. So I think of those two examples as things that could happen to strangers too.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Well, I just wanted also to add, to expand that, now that your music's back in circulation and available again, that's clearly a great thing. And for you, is it interesting that your music now finds new audiences?
Oh yeah, it's kind of thrilling. Well, I was always surprised how you know, it wasn't terribly successful, but how successful my music was. I was always very surprised. I mean, like putting out the CD, and then they say it's one of the 10 top, you know, cadence, and then, you know, I got reviews, and then I got a review in Spin magazine, Underground. They did quite a write-up on me, and, you know, the people who sent it, they sent records from all people on the Lower East Side, you know, very advanced musicians. And it was my record that they chose to write about, you know, that I was like, because I would say that, you know, in my music, I was consciously, since I wasn't trained, I was constantly trying to be like a breaker out, you know. I thought, you know, since I didn't know how it was supposed to be done, I could take all these chances that other people who were trained and how it was supposed to be weren't going to. But of course, avant-garde music, they do go pretty far out. But anyhow, it was responded to in that manner. Yeah.
What was your reaction to this all happening with the paintings?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it was so fantastic how that came into my life. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, I've heard the story, but it's such an amazing story of how Matt found your work. Do you want to tell everyone?
He found it in Japan. See, because actually he found my recording in Japan, you know, not in the United States. But in Japan, there was quite a reaction, you know, I mean, nothing, you know, that anybody, you know, was talking about big deals. But, you know, there was a reaction to my music and also to my artwork. There was somebody who was interested in putting out a book of my drawings from seeing the drawings on the covers.
That's awesome. Yeah, the story of Matt finding Amy's record in a record store in Japan and seeing the cover art, and that was like the impetus for the show. Am I correct in that?
It's that painting, I believe, right? Yeah, so this painting was on the cover of the record you saw in Japan. Yeah. Yet you lived 10 miles apart from each other.
Yeah.
Right. Oh wow, I didn't know that part. That's funny. Yeah, so when that came about, like, you were just happy, excited?
Yeah, overwhelmed.
Yeah, okay, that's awesome.
Overwhelmed.
Before we see if there's any questions, we're drifting towards 5 o'clock. I just wondered if you could just briefly mention your embroidered shirt project, because when you performed at the opening, you had an amazing embroidered outfit. You have another one today.
I do a lot of embroidery, yeah. So this is an example. You know, I used to every night. I would sit there and embroider every night. You know, now it's not so much, but.
Yeah, I see a merch line on the horizon. Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Amy. If there are questions from the audience, that would be fantastic. Just feel free to raise your hand.
If you want to ask about a particular painting, what inspired it, you know, or whatever.
I'm interested in the few monotypes.
Oh.
The question is referring to the pair of monotype prints which are on this wall. So if you
Well, when I came out to Great Neck, the wonderful thing I found out was that there was a great printmaking program. So I made hundreds of prints, and these are just monotypes are. So they chose to show these two and put them together. But monotypes are you get, you know. A ghost monotype, but this, and I paint on them sometimes afterwards, so they both look equally strong, but actually one would come first, and then the second one would be the ghost. But what was the impulse for it? Well, I would say it is, you know, like a skeleton, but there's a mirror, looking in the mirror. I don't know what was in my mind about that, but
Because you did the nails, and there's a lot of
those things happen, you know, I can't say exactly, you know, why, but they do.
very, scary things. It's not like Alice in Wonderland looking into the looking glass.
Uh-huh.
But, it's like someone looking deep inside themselves.
Uh-huh.
Maybe.
Could be. Yeah, I was thinking
Like the two together is a lot.
about, yeah, the two, that was their idea, to put the two together, yeah. Was a good idea. But as far as prints, I mean, if it was up to me, there was a whole lot of other prints I would have put there rather than
That's for the next show. Thanks for the question. On the floor here, sorry, in front of me.
Oh, yeah. I'm wondering if you might tell us something about the painting that was,
the ear.
yeah, and if there's anything you could share about the relationship between your painting practice and your musical.
So the
Well,
painting that's been
the ear might
referred,
have something, but I just, I got into looking, well, I noticed that, I got into looking at my ears, and I noticed that one of my ears looks a lot different than the other ear, which really kind of made me feel really funny, because one ear looks like what I would call a normal ear, and the other ear looks like, to me, like a sort of semi-deformed ear. You know, it's not, you know, anything, but it doesn't have as much padding on it, let's say, so it looks more bumpy and stuff like that. But anyhow, you know, I was looking at, and I had painted another picture where I put an ear in. I was thinking it's not ear, but I put an ear in where the moon would be, and there was women who I felt were singers, you know. But from looking at the ear, you know, it's an interesting shape in here, and that's a lot why I got into that, you know. But it probably had something to do with not just my music, all the things you hear, you know.
and that's quite a recent painting, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Any further questions? Other questions or comments?
And one more thing I wanted to say was I used to paint with oils, which I like better, but now, I mean, I feel more protected by painting with acrylics, you know, because of the fumes and stuff. But, you know, I hope to paint with oils again. And I have a house, and then I have an apartment that I used to live in, which is also full of art. When my parents were, you know, I moved into the house, so I might start trying. I actually have one little painting I do with oils in the basement, but mostly I've been painting with acrylics, you know.
Yep, Brian?
I was wondering if any of the extended vocal technique singers, like Joan LaBarbera or Phil Minton, ever interested you, or whether you saw them?
Joan I've seen, you know,
Oh, okay.
and Jay Clayton was always very interesting to me, and who's Gunter Hampel's wife? Jean Lee.
Yeah.
These people were, yeah, they were the queens of Jean Lee and Jay Clayton. They were kind of the queens of avant-garde singing on the Lower East Side. Yeah.
Thank you.
If we want to leave it there, we're going to take a 5-minute break just to reorganize the setup here before the musical performance. So feel free to take a look around, get a drink, take a look at the records and the music from the merch table, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. But thank you very much, Audrey. Thank you, Amy.